Hi, everyone, and welcome to our session. We're very excited today to have two experts with us. We have Lindsay Bryan Podvin, and she is a biracial certified financial therapist, an LMSW, and the founder of Mind Money Balance, where she blends financial wellness with mental health expertise. Drawn to holistic mental health advocacy, and treatment, she found her calling at the intersection of money and mental health. As a facilitator of the Financial Empowerment Initiative, a 5-part workshop series at the University of Michigan Center for the Education of Women, she guides individuals through lasting financial confidence. She's the author of the Financial Anxiety Solution, an interactive workbook that helps people work through their money worries so they can enjoy life rather than tracking every penny. Her insights have been featured in Vox, CNN, Real Simple, CNBC, NPR, Bustle, HuffPost, and more. Lindsay holds a degree in sociology from Michigan State University and a master's in social work from the University of Michigan, with certificates in financial social work and financial therapy. She lives with her partner and their dog on the occupied land of the Anishinaabe, also known as Michigan. And then we also have with us Gabby D'Angelo. And Gabby is a financial advisor. She has 15 years of experience in financial services, working with individuals, families, and organizations to improve financial literacy and outcomes for clients. She's worked for Cedar Capital, Merrill Lynch, Fidelity, Bain Consulting, and PNC. Prior to serving clients as a financial advisor, Gabby worked and published in a statewide research and policy at the Evidence Based Practice Institute of the University of Washington and in clinical practice at the American Indian Health and Family Services. She is a graduate of the University of Michigan School of Social Work and I.E. Brown University dual MBA program, which explicitly combines social justice, humanities disciplines with traditional executive business education. Gabby, Lindsay, I'm going to turn it over to you for this very informative session.
All right, so we're going to get into, oh, I'm going the wrong way. Hold, please. Don't worry for folks. I saw some people say, like, oh, I just got here. Don't worry. We're at the very first poll. You should see a poll pop up. Reminder to participate in the multiple choice polls, and later on, we'll have some short answers. Who are you? Who is in the audience today? Alumni, School of Social Work faculty or staff, student, MSW or PhD, or something else. And if you are fitting into that other category, go ahead and drop in the chat maybe what brought you to this session. So we'll take another moment before I pass it over to Gabby.
Awesome. And while people are answering that poll, I just wanted to mention I see some folks from all over. We've got folks joining us from Italy even, and Connecticut, out of state, in state. So thank you everybody for taking the time today. We're hoping that this session is super useful. If along the way there's something that you want to ask or isn't part of our presentation, please feel free to put it in the chat, and we want to make sure everybody gets out of this session what they are hoping to get out of it and taking their time to get out of it and joining from all over the world. So thank you so much for your time, and please feel free, we love participation, so please feel free to put in the chat any thoughts or ideas you have.
Yes. Okay. Amazing. All right, so you're in the right place if you are looking for financial essentials for social workers. Gabby, I'll give it to you.
Yes, wonderful. So thanks everybody again for joining us. And as Madison just popped into the chat, please do respond to all the polls. That is for CE purposes. So if you're not seeing the poll, please let us know. Sometimes it's because maybe you missed the intro to it, or maybe you have Zoom in full screen mode, but please let us know if you're not seeing a poll, because that is part of getting CE credit. So just a little housekeeping there. This session is really intended to be educational. It's intended to be an overview, and it's intended to cover a lot of topics that really could each be their own session, right? So in reality, what we're hoping to give everybody here is big picture, broad scope overview of some nuts and bolts on the financial side, how those nuts and bolts fit together with your own personal self-care, personal mental health, and financial wellness journey, as well as maybe some tools you could take into the field if you are a practitioner, either clinical practitioner or community practitioner, and how those nuts and bolts might fit together with your work as a practitioner, not just your work and in your own personal life. This is not intended to be legal or financial advice, right? So both Lindsay and I work in roles where we do offer official advice and guidance, but that is not what this is. And, we are hoping that we're not going to be giving any information that, causes a conflict of interest. It shouldn't be that specific anyway, but we just want to make sure that we're giving everybody some basic, non-biased information overview. If you want further follow-up or specific questions outside the scope of this presentation, feel free to follow up with us or with Madison. Okay. It looks like some folks aren't seeing the poll. Did everybody get a chance to respond to the first poll before we move on, just so that housekeeping wise, like we know what we're doing here? If you missed the first poll, it looks like Madison popped into the chat that the question was, who's joining us? You can put your response in the chat. Lindsay had read the choices earlier, so hopefully you responded in the chat. Perfect. Love that. Okay. So again, our objectives, and we recognize that everyone might be coming to this session with different feelings, different thoughts or expectations, and their own personal experience with financial wellness, right? And so our goal today, our objective today, is to examine how those personal beliefs and the professional culture in which you work as a social worker have maybe shaped your beliefs and behavior. And then be able to reflect on those so that we can inform our own personal journey as well as the journey of clients going forward. We're hoping to be able to apply at least 2 financial self-care strategies, right? So part of this is absolutely personally self-care journey, right? Make sure that we're able to tackle our own financial wellness in a good way. And then 3, make sure that in an educational way, in sort of an academic sense, you're able to identify where am I in my financial journey and what are some key considerations or key pieces of information that are helpful in that stage. Okay. So, as I mentioned, we've got lots of folks joining us. You're taking time out of your busy schedule to do this CE credit. We want to make sure that your concerns, your questions, your biggest thought on your mind is addressed if we can. So please do share what is one thing you're hoping to get out of today's session. You should be seeing poll question 2 on your screen. If you're not, make some adjustments or respond in the chat. So again, the question is, what is one thing you're hoping to get out of today's session? As Madison's mentioning in the chat there, short answer response, respond in the poll or in the chat. Looks like we're collecting some answers here. If you want to pop into the chat what you mentioned in the poll, we'd love to read some of those out, just in case what you're wondering is what someone else is wondering too. Budgeting strategies. Okay, love that. We can definitely cover some of that. Better understanding of the possibilities of how to manage my money or structure of money. Financial literacy for self and personal future. How to be more responsible financially and encourage clients to do the same. New ideas. How the info relates to retirement, okay? Budgeting, money management, financial goals, how they could change over life stage. Wow, that person, Morgan, looks like you read our presentation ahead of time. So that's good. How to handle student loans and side hustles for social workers. Okay, yeah. Good. We're getting there. We're close. We've probably got maybe 25 more folks to respond. How to be more financially responsible.
I would say take 5 more seconds to pop your answer in, and then we'll move on to our next question.
Yeah. Good. Financial help after divorce. So, yeah, life events, increased financial literacy, investing, for sure. Relationship with money correlating with childhood and trauma. Absolutely. How to think about financial security differently. Okay, we're getting there. We're probably missing still 20 folks or so. As you can, go ahead and pop your answers into the chat, but otherwise I think Lindsay will probably cruise onward. How to help clients navigate financial stress, for sure. Okay. Perfect. So as we roll into the meat of our presentation, it sounds like we're going to cover a number of the topics that are important to you all. So I'm glad that you were able to share those with us. If there were any things that we didn't cover from the list that I just read out from the chat, please feel free to pop them in when we get to the question and answer section of the presentation. But until then, I think we're going to roll on and see if we can get to many of these topics here. The third poll question is now up on the screen. When you think about money or financial security, what comes up for you first, right? So this could be an emotional response. It could be a series of thoughts. It could be, any number of things, of a physical reaction, a memory. It could be any number of things that come up for you. Money ties across lots of aspects of our journey, of our personal and shared human experience. So that's really, the critical. Okay, perfect. So same procedure in terms of the chat. It looks like some options for response to what comes up in money or financial security. It looks like having enough, feeling good when things are settled, pushing back, advocating for yourself, fear, when salary doesn't keep up with inflation, feeling comfortable, anxiety, the broader economy, what things are in our control, what things are not in our control, stress, frustration, feeling able to retire, role and responsibility of privilege, shrinking middle class, implications for who we serve, worry, anxiety, control, freedom, saving enough for retirement, anxiety on how to plan for the unknown and unexpected, just basically meeting your needs, right? Being able to save for the future and meeting your current needs at the same time. Yeah, and I think I see a lot of, someone mentioned they're feeling the same as some other folks. I feel there's a lot of overlap in these responses, right? Like I think as social workers, we can see there's a lot of through lines, around how do we feel, where do we feel in control, where do we feel out of control, how does that lack of control affect us, what things making us feel out of control. Okay, yeah, not knowing enough to be able to make those decisions. So hopefully this is the start of maybe solving some of those lack of knowledge feelings. Having enough, like what is enough, savings and investment, what's enough currently, how can you stay in social work, which is a historically underpaid profession. Having enough to survive currently and save for the future. Yeah. So it sounds like, if nothing else for today, hopefully everyone is feeling a sense of community around some of the emotional responses that are coming up for us, right? The sense of community, like, hey, I also feel a level of anxiety about how the economy is affecting me. I also feel a level of anxiety about being able to provide my current needs as well as save for my future opportunity or future self. I also feel a sense of, being in survival mode about this and paying for musts at the same time trying to save. So, yeah, just maybe like 30 more seconds and then we can roll on.
Yeah. I think in the interest of time, we'll just keep cruising. But yeah, as Gabby mentioned, go ahead if you haven't had a chance to respond and respond. And just so because I can only see Gabby. So everyone knows Gabby and I will be taking turns kind of switching back and forth. And for folks who came in a couple of minutes late, on the first housekeeping slide, we had a reminder, or rather a note that the pink slides are going to indicate some sort of poll or short answer. So if you have slipped into your email and you see something peek on the screen, that's a good visual indication that we're checking in with something, but otherwise it'll look like this. So you already hinted at this, but what we're talking about today when it comes to financial essentials is why it matters to us as individuals and why it matters to us as social workers in the field more broadly. These are things we already know about how it impacts us as individuals, particularly those of us who work in helping fields. There is such an increased risk of burnout when our finances are not being well managed, or we feel behind, or we're struggling to make ends meet. We can experience boundary erosion, right? Overworking, experiencing hypervigilance around job safety, feeling like we can't really advocate for ourselves because if we don't have that financial security, we may feel like we have to say yes to every opportunity that comes our way. Or if we say no, I won't take my phone with me on vacation, we worry that our job might be at risk. And so we lose some of those boundaries. We can experience compassion fatigue when we are not well resourced, just like we know if we're not sleeping well, eating well, moving our body, practicing stress management, it can impact our ability to have that deep well of empathy and compassion. This can happen if you're experiencing financial stress. We know that there is a negative impact on interpersonal relationships, whether that's a clinical relationship you have, whether that's a romantic partnership you have, whether it's with your friends. If you're experiencing financial stress, there is a strong link between physical and emotional stress and financial stress. And of course, workforce attrition, people leaving the field if they feel like the field that they're in makes it hard for them to care for their needs and then some. When we think about this within the context of a lot of the messages that we get as social workers, there's so much research in the field on burnout and high workload and trauma and vicarious trauma, but often there isn't a conversation happening about the real impact of financial strain. And I want for us to think about how we can include ourselves in practicing financial self-care, just like we think about including ourselves in practicing care for ourselves in terms of other wellness domains, such as our mental health, our physical health, our emotional health. You are a part of the equation and you matter, and we need to make sure we're taking care of the financial aspect as well. When it comes to the bigger context of what this means for you as a social worker, a lot of these things are things that we already know. But folks who go into care work, whether it's nursing, social work, teaching, special education, there is wage suppression that happens. There is a huge gender bias of folks who are in fields that are dominated by women and non-binary folks of being paid less. We already all know about racial, wealth, and earning gaps and chronic underfunding in our field and the fields of clients that we care about. So as Gabby and I are going to go through 4 different kind of financial life stages today, we'll be breaking it down into what to know, also how it impacts you as an individual, and what to think about to bring into your workplace or your organization. So just setting the stage for what this might look like. And I think it's really important to touch down here that yes, we live in a system that is deeply flawed, and all of us are doing what we can to push back against the things that are broken or not working. And personally, I think we have incredible optimism to be in the field and to believe that with skills and trust and experience, we have the capacity to make some change. And even when these systems are unjust and unfair, we're also in them. So how do we take care of ourselves in a system that isn't perfect? How do we care for our clients in a system that is flawed? Gabby and I aren't going to be, waving a magic wand today and saying, hey, this is the solution to a broken economic system, but we are going to be saying, here are some fundamentals of how things work. What can you do to strengthen your own knowledge? And what can you do to strengthen your knowledge in terms of how it impacts folks that you work with and the organizations that you work for or work with? Okay, great. So now we are going to transition into these 4 different milestones of our lifespan. So we're summarizing these into 4 kind of buckets, if you will. And before we get into the very first milestone, we're going to do a little self-check-in. So get ready. Our next poll is coming before I turn it over to Gabby here. So which financial milestone are you working toward? So the first financial milestone is spending less than you earn. The second financial milestone is growing savings and investments. The third milestone is preparing for retirement. And the fourth milestone is enjoying life in retirement. Again, go ahead and answer that in the poll. That should pop up in a separate window. If for some reason that poll does not pop up, make sure to answer it in the chat, especially if you are hoping to get CE credit here. So it looks like we have about 98 people who've answered so far. So we're almost there. I'll give it another 5-ish seconds. So yeah, we're just doing a quick self-assessment. Where do you think you are in terms of which financial milestone you are working toward? So take another moment or two. Okay, it looks like about half of the people here say they're in that growing savings and investment category. About 25% of people are in that first category of spending less than they earn. And then 17% are preparing for retirement. And a lucky 10% of you are enjoying life in retirement. Can't wait to be there someday. All right. Beautiful. We're going to go ahead and move on, and I'll pass it to Gabby to take us through the first financial milestone.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Lindsay. So, I also saw in the chat some people mentioning that they feel like they're in all the milestones all at once. And if that is you, I can understand a couple reasons for that, and we will touch on this briefly as we go through the phases. But there are some aspects of these that do cut across a variety of life stages, and in a way do feel a little bit cyclical in the activities that are involved. So don't feel odd if you feel that some aspect of all of those pieces might apply to you. You're probably right. Some aspect of those things do cut across. The first phase that we're going to talk about here is pre-accumulation. Pre-accumulation is that phase where you might be kind of dealing with pre-existing conditions of your financial wellness, right? In a way, you're maybe cleaning up some debt. Maybe you're dealing with student debt. Maybe you're dealing with consumer debt, credit cards, and so on. Maybe you're thinking big picture about how to structure your life so that you can be financially well. That might involve, how do we do some budgeting, right? So someone mentioned budgeting strategies, okay? When we think about budgeting strategies, we might think about, one, obviously the nitty gritty of tracking what we spend, but Two, maybe zooming out a little bit and thinking, what are the structural aspects of my life that cause my budget to look the way it does, right? So what are those things that are non-negotiables, things that are needs, right? A place to live, food to eat, transportation, communication. Those aspects of your budget are really more of a structural thought process than they are of a should I be spending money on a place to live? Well, that's not really a question that you can answer no to, right? That's a question that you have to think about structurally in sort of a big picture way. Where do I locate myself? What kind of living arrangement makes sense for me? What are the costs associated? Not just on the sort of top line item, but underneath that, what are some of the costs associated with taxes for that location, or so on and so forth, right? And then here in this last budget tick here, we have lifetime earning versus lifetime cost. And I think that's one that we will come back to. As I was saying, it's a cyclical process, right? We're going to come back to this when we talk about planning for retirement, because that same concept of as I earn money, structurally, my budget has to support me now and in the future. And so as I think about the career that I'm in, and thinking specific to social workers, we had come up several times, how do we stay in social work given the lifetime earning potential, and what does that look like? One, I would want to challenge that idea of the lifetime earning potential, that as social workers, we may choose aspects of the profession that do allow us to earn a little bit more, and that's okay. In fact, it's a good idea if you think it's going to support your financial wellness to look at the field that you're in and select areas of that field that feel fulfilling but also are financially supportive, right? That's okay to do that. It's okay to put financial wellness up there with feeling fulfilled. That's okay. And I think that's one thing that we should think about more, reflect on more as social workers. The other aspect of it is if you are in a position where you've chosen a part of the social work field that is on the lower end of lifetime earning potential, that's okay too. We need to think about how to match that up with structural life budgeting decisions that allow you to both take care of yourself in the current day and potentially save for the future, right? So I think that budgeting conversation is, yes, a conversation about step by step, but also a conversation bigger picture, thinking structurally about how your career and how your expenses are kind of set up there. So as we are doing this, and I don't know if this happened to anyone out there, but oftentimes when budgeting comes up, there's an immediate sort of pushback, whether it's fear or whether it's, well, wait a minute, I really do need to spend X, Y, and Z, or I'm used to doing such and such. It's part of my routine and it costs X, Y, Z money. I don't want to give that up, right? And so when we think about budgeting, usually the money that we spend falls into three categories. And so as you're regulating your nervous system, you might think through these categories, right? This is kind of how to marry those two ideas, the budgeting concepts with sort of the nervous system regulation. On the budgeting side, we have needs, wants, and savings, right? And so there's sort of this old adage about the 50-30-20 rule, and that rule is very hard to achieve. It says basically 50% of your budget should be needs, 30% should be savings, and you show me somebody who can save 30% of their money in pre-accumulation, and that would be a miracle, and 20% should be for wants. And so one, I don't know that old adage is realistic. Two, I think aspects of it are important conceptually, right? There should be some money that we have in the needs bucket, and that's where we think structurally. Structurally, my needs have to be met, so how do I meet those needs within the budget of my earning? Two, when we think about wants, we should spend money on wants. I mean, this is one of those things that helps us regulate our nervous system. If we're constantly in that state of wanting or that state of denying ourselves, that is not, one, healthy, two, going to work out well in the long run, right? It's just not sustainable. So as we think about our budgeting concept, it is good to set aside money that is specifically earmarked for things that we want to spend it on, right? And that is okay, and it should be part of the plan. That is part of regulating our process over time. Then the third piece is that savings piece. And I see someone already pointing it out. Thank you, Carol, in the chat, which is the cost of needs become a trade-off with the cost of savings, right? And so how do we sort of build momentum? And I think Lindsay has done a great job highlighting, those small wins that you can have. So as you think about the cost of your needs, thinking about some trade-off between the cost of current needs structurally and the cost of saving for the future, right? And that is hard to do in a big picture way all at once. And so that idea of step by stepping it is a really good thing. And I see that some people are pointing out it is scary, right? And I think it's disrupting us in a lot of ways. And when we first started out in the presentation, we were talking about things we can control and things we can't control, right? I think as social workers, especially, anyone here who's worked with clients or has gone through their own therapy probably is familiar with those locus of control, that picture of the concentric circles with, the one in the center that you actually have control over and the one in the middle that you have some influence on and the one on the outside where you really have no control at all, right? So how our economic system is structured is something none of us has control over. We may exert some level of collective influence based on our own decisions, but really the one we have control over, the one that's going to help us regulate ourselves and be financially well, is that piece that's at the very center of our own sort of behavioral process and thinking, right? Thinking and behavior as related to how we feel about these things. So thinking about that budgeting piece, you need to have the right support. Maybe you sit next to somebody who can show you how they've been successful on one aspect of this. Maybe you loop in support from friends, family, partner to say, hey, we're going to set a goal together. This is the money we're going to spend each month on things that we want. Maybe we do that together, or maybe we do some of that separately. And these are the things that we're going to shift over to savings where we can. And it's okay to start small, right? It's okay to have that habit of, I'm just going to put $10 one day a week that I would have, maybe sat with you at lunch. I'm just going to bring my lunch and I'm going to put that in my savings account. And if you could support me in doing that, that would be really great, right? So that would be one example in pre-accumulation of starting to build those habits and taking those next steps. Okay, as we think more broadly, again, the goal of the session is to think about ourselves, to think about micro, meso, macro implications. And so as we start to think broader considerations, you're right. You've already pointed them out in the chat, right? Like rising costs, geographical and employment trends. But those things are really emphasizing, as we say in our last bullet here, they're emphasizing the outcomes of a system that we don't control, right? So instead, shifting that mindset toward a process that we can control, right? What is the process within budgeting, within pre-accumulation that we can control will help, one, our actual outcome, and two, will help how we feel along the way. Just kind of thinking about, remember to keep that focus on the things that we can control versus those outcomes that we really have no control over. So I'll pass it over to Lindsay. I do see some things in the chat we can come back to during question and answer time, but absolutely just want to validate that it is a scary time, right? Like even as we're saying, hey, let's focus on process, let's focus on things we can control, let's focus on our own budget, thinking structurally, thinking detailed. Those are the things that we can do in this phase. But that is not to say it's not daunting. In fact, because it's daunting, we're spending time and energy re-explaining to ourselves what we can do in the face of feeling afraid, in the face of feeling daunted, right? So it's, not at all to say, oh, it's easy, just do these things. Instead, it's to say, it is very hard. It is very hard. It involves a lot of ability to think about the future, a lot of, delayed gratification, a lot of big structural things that we have no control over, and making our own center that we do control more difficult. So completely validate all of those feelings and absolutely true. And so what do we do then? Like, what do we do once we've validated those feelings? These are some things we can do, right? Take control over that center circle, that process that we have on our own budgeting.
Thanks, Gabby. So, oh yeah, you already talked about these things, but I think I didn't click through the slides. And just holler if you need me to move forward or back.
You're great. You're great.
So the next milestone is accumulation. So after you have worked through some of those building blocks around understanding what's coming in and what's going out, what's the next step for you? So the next step here, as you're working on getting your head around what's going on, is making sure that you have a financial safety net for yourself. This is often you'll hear people say things like, oh, you need emergency savings. We'll talk about what that means in a little bit, but making sure that you do have a financial safety net, taking advantage if you're traditionally employed of things like matched money. That's something like contributing to a retirement account and your employer matches some or all of the monies that you put into retirement. Other things to know at this milestone are making sure that you're taking advantage of tax advantaged accounts. This is usually something like a 401k or a 403b. These are retirement accounts where you are taxed later in life when you are taking the monies out. A 401k and 403b are essentially the same thing. One is more for folks who work for-profit companies, whereas 403bs are typically for folks who work in at the government or in nonprofits. An IRA or a Roth IRA, this is an individual retirement account. If you earn money, you can also put away. If you earn your own money, you are able to put away money for your own retirement. Roth is just a way of saying you pay taxes now instead of paying taxes later. And if you are self-employed, you have options like a SEP. It's called a self-employed pension, which is a terrible name for a plan in my opinion, because it's not a pension, you're actually contributing to it, or solo 401ks. And then outside of that, there are things like taxable accounts. So if you think about, again, no, I'm not affiliated with or endorsing these companies, just giving some examples, but thinking if you invest in a Vanguard or a Charles Schwab index fund, and it is not in a 401k or in an IRA or something like that, that might be considered a taxable account. Somebody put in the chat, HSAs are great too. So yes, that's a healthcare savings account, and this person is very smart. They said they are triple tax advantaged, which means for people who have a high deductible healthcare plan, you have the option to put some money into a healthcare savings account, an HSA. Now, that money that you put in there is meant to be used for healthcare needs, but what this person is tapping on is that a lot of people don't fully take advantage of them because you are able to put money into that savings account for, I shouldn't say free, but without being taxed on it. You are also able to invest money within that HSA, depending on how much money you have put in there. And then when you take that money out, when you use it on a qualified healthcare expense, you are also not taxed on that. Great question on creating an HSA if you're self-employed. I'll defer that to Gabby, and we might be able to tackle that later. And reminder, we might not be able to get to every single question, but I keep putting them in the chat. I'd rather have them in there. And I should also say this, that if Gabby or I can't answer your questions, please, please, please take this as an opportunity, whether you're seeing things in the chat or whether you've got questions on your own, to start building some resilience of looking some of these things up and starting to get your head around them. One of my favorite things when I'm working with clients is when they are teaching their like teenagers or young adult children about money, is to look at like their first W-2 statement. And if a parent doesn't know what FICA or Social Security tax is, sit down together and Google it. Remember practicing modeling some of these things for yourselves. Okay. Getting into, I don't want to get too far away. So what are some ways that we can take care of ourselves? So I mentioned in the last slide this idea of an emergency fund. Often people say, oh, you need 6 or 8 months of expenses in an emergency fund for it to be quote unquote fully funded. Interestingly, that talking point that gets floated around. We really can't figure out where it came from, but we saw it start to really gain traction around the Great Recession, which was when it typically took 6 to 8 months to find a job. So I am a data nerd, and I know lots of you are here as well. So I have a couple of data points and then an anecdotal point. So the first data point I want you to work toward, if you don't have an emergency fund yet, is $400. And that's because so many Americans don't even have $400 available in the event of an emergency. So get to that very first kind of ladder, and then you can kind of take a beat. The next number I want you to strive for, if you're just building up your emergency fund, is $1,000. Not rooted in science, just rooted in vibes, in what I see in my practice as being anecdotally something that people feel really good about getting their arms around. And then this 3,000 months of expenses, this is actually data informed. Sabat and Gallagher did a long, they looked at, I want to say it was like 1,200 families in North America around what the average cost of an emergency is and how much money somebody would need to prevent a one-time financial hiccup from becoming a financial disaster. And what they found was about 1 month of expenses is the amount of money that the average family needs in order to prevent a flat tire from becoming a household emergency. So that's kind of where I want you to start on that emergency fund ladder. Other things to think about, also rooted in data, research shows that visualizing your future self actually helps you increase your retirement savings. There was a study that found aging a picture of your face and imagining that person in retirement improved the likelihood that you would save money for your retirement. That was initially done, I want to say, in like 2011, 2012. Nowadays, all we have to do is like snap a picture of our face, and I'm sure we can see ourselves into the future. So you can go ahead and do that if you're thinking about how to increase your savings. And research also shows that having a positive outlook or optimism and trusting yourself that you actually can save and you have the skills to save improves the likelihood of savings versus the shame-based pessimism that has been the go-to model in kind of old world personal finance. You know, you shouldn't enjoy your life until you have XYZ. Gabby hinted at that earlier, that we're not here to shame you for any of your decisions. And research, in fact, shows that leaning on that stick instead of the carrot makes it harder for you to save. Maria, I do see your hand raised. We're going to put all the questions toward the end. If you want to pop your question into the chat or into the question box, you're welcome to do that. And then finally, what to think about from a broader consideration as you're working with clients or organizations. Perfect is the enemy of good when it comes to trying to get it right when it comes to our money. $400 saved is better than $0 saved. Having a little bit of money in a retirement account is better than no money in a retirement account. Giving yourself and the clients you work with permission to not let, well, I can't do ABC, get in the way of not doing anything at all. The other thing I would say is practicing self-care by subtraction. I can't tell you how many clients I see who tell me 50 different things that they're working on toward their financial goals. And we know that having 50 different things that you're working toward can be a recipe for not achieving any of those things. So not only subtracting the number of things you're working toward, but also giving yourself permission, as Gabby mentioned, a lot of these things intersect. Instead of thinking about, I have to pay down my debt and have an emergency fund and have a retirement account fully funded and be saving for my kids, at higher education. Take a deep breath and focus on one thing at a time, self-care by subtraction. And again, modeling for clients and organizations that this stuff is confusing. And also we can learn about it over time and taking steps to strengthen our financial our financial foundations. Okay, passing it back over to Gabby for the next milestone.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Lindsay. So I've been seeing lots of help in the chat among folks, which is great. I hope that everyone saw Madison's housekeeping note to just make sure that your toggle is on everyone versus on to presenters, just so everyone can benefit from any of the suggestions that are being made there in the chat. So we've covered, and as Lindsay mentioned in the beginning, there's going to be 4 of these sort of financial stages. And the first financial stage was pre-accumulation. That's where we're looking at where did we start from? How do we set up structurally our budget? How do we pay attention to our budget in small ways that are within our control? What are we doing in terms of our expenses, needs versus wants versus savings? The second phase is where, presuming that we've been able to kind of move through that first initial positive cash flow, we're moving towards something that looks like accumulation, where we're actually gradually building the balances in our various accounts. And so that can be organized into, we love, a financial hierarchy of needs, right? Similar to Maslow's pyramid, if everyone can kind of picture that in their mind. Pre-accumulation is that foundation. It's getting to positive cash flow, right? That's the foundation of everything else. Positive cash flow month to month. The next, and if anyone's concerned about the phrasing that I'm using or the vocab words, please just pop it in the chat, and I'm happy to use different words or redefine things if it's not clear. So that first foundation is positive cash flow. Then we move to the next rung up, which is accumulating an emergency savings, right? So just having enough cash in the bank so that there's not a time where you have to start back over at positive cash flow, right? So you don't have to jump back down a rung. And then that third rung up is where Lindsay was talking about that piece of accumulating your tax deferred monies, your tax advantage monies. And then the final rung is those taxable investment accounts, or sort of higher level planning. So assuming that, we're moving through those levels and we're able to kind of progress, the hope as we manage ourselves, and it is hard behaviorally to manage ourselves through those steps, it's not easy, but assuming we're progressing, we get to a phase called distribution. Okay, so this is the third phase that we're going to cover. It's the second to last one. Distribution is where you're in a state of no longer continuing to work full time. Typically, we say distribution or retirement starts somewhere around age 60, and that's because you have access to your retirement savings, your tax advantage savings at 59 and a half. So we say we typically have retirement ranging anywhere from 60 to 70 years old, right? That would be sort of retiring on time. And age 60 is the earliest you can start, or 59 and a half is the earliest you can start to use your tax advantage funds. As we move through that phase, 62, you start to access Social Security, but that first access to Social Security is not full retirement age for Social Security purposes. So that's important to know. You may be limiting your income if you start it before full retirement age. 65, you're signing up for Medicare. So that's when you can officially enter the healthcare system as a retired person. And then 70 is the latest time that you can start drawing Social Security, right? So that's why we start to talk about 60 to 70 as being that distribution timeline, because it's where other government supported systems start to kick in. One thing you might have noticed about this list is that there's a lot of detail. There's a lot of aspects. I mean, like here we are on this hour and a half long presentation, and we're talking about like the age of 59 and a half as a specific thing, right? So there's a lot to understand. There's a lot of systems involved. It's a lot of red tape. It's a bureaucracy set up to support folks through this phase, but it is a lot of work to understand it, to know it, to use it. Sometimes there's like waiting periods involved. Sometimes you thought you signed up for Social Security to start next month, but actually it starts in 6 months. So it's just one of those times in life where for our own selves and for clients who might be working on this, or if you work in an agency that has aging populations, you just need to be aware that there's a lot involved in making the transition to this phase in a very practical sense. And then if we step back and say, next slide, in a different way, there's a whole other set of things involved in this process, right? Where we start to envision, well, what is our life if we're not actively working full time like we were before? What is our persona, our identity? What if we attach ourselves really strongly to being social workers, which many of us do, and that's okay. But that is part then of letting go of that first two phases of pre-accumulation, accumulation, and moving to distribution is, okay, well, who am I now? What does that look like? How can I envision that? What does it look like structurally? Again, this is another place where we come back in that cyclical way to the structural envisioning of our life, right? Structurally, how do I want to set up my retirement housing circumstance? How do I want to set up my retirement location, right? Relative to friends and family, relative to weather, relative to how I envision spending my time, my health. So these structural aspects really affect this transition in the similar way that they affect that pre-accumulation transition, right? We're getting to a place where we have to kind of think about more pieces of our identity than just how we're going to budget for retirement and which income starts when, right? And so as in a similar way, like taking a look at how do we prioritize our needs? How do we prioritize our wants during this time? This is where maybe we start to step back and take a broader picture view of our impact, right? Like, how do we assess what impact we'd like to have? How do we understand how that's going to happen? How do we make peace or come to a place of acceptance with what has or hasn't happened through the course of our career, both financially and in general? Right. So there's a lot going on in this phase of ages 60 to 70. And I would just encourage everyone, one, to treat yourself if you're in that phase or approaching that phase with kindness and grace, and allowing yourself to think about things outside of money, right? Sometimes we get super caught up in like, well, we have to sign this form, we have to turn this in for Medicare, we have to start this over here, and we kind of forget the other part. Or to give yourself permission to say, you know, whatever we've arrived to this phase with is what we have, and that's okay. We're going to accept that and move toward a place where that can provide for our needs, right? Structurally, how do we do that? So I would just encourage everyone in terms of self-care to think about those two pieces and to really consider this distribution phase as another opportunity to be formative in how we're creating our budget and how we're considering our priorities. And with all of life's experience, sometimes that can be a really great opportunity. So, you know, again, if we're thinking about this personally, those are some of the things that we kind of think about. If we think about it more broadly as practitioners, again, just keeping in mind, having that empathy for clients who might be working through this phase. And if you're within an organization and you have colleagues who are approaching retirement, that might be a time to be, you know, extra supportive. Or you might have clients who have parents who are working through some aspects of this phase. And it might be a time to remind your clients, like, this is what they might be going through. These are some of their changes. Like, it's a time to allow ourselves and folks who are around us who might be going through this phase some understanding, some empathy around what a huge transition it is in terms of finances, but also in terms of identity and location and all kinds of things. So that would be, you know, how I would sum it up. In terms of, you know, conversations here in the chat, absolutely, being retired can be wonderful. As Lindsay mentioned earlier, like, we're all on our way, hopefully, to that moment. That's great. And at the same time, you know, it can be feeling really vulnerable. Like, thank you for sharing that, Laura, because having that sort of vulnerability of like, oh my gosh, I have earned what I'm going to earn probably, and I am here in the state that I'm going to be in. Like, it's, you know, I have the support of the government infrastructure that I have, and I have the savings that I have, does feel vulnerable. Like, we're not going to have a next job. We're not going to go back to work necessarily. And so having that sort of moment of, yeah, it is what it is. Whatever it has been is what it will have been, is a big deal, right? It feels vulnerable. It feels sometimes overwhelming. So I'll end there and let Lindsay pop to the next slide.
Thanks, Gabby. So we're coming into the final milestone here. So yeah, like breath if you need. So the final milestone of financial essentials and financial planning here is legacy. And the reason we landed on the word legacy here is that sometimes this is referred to end of life. And over the past few years, I've heard such a shift in the work with my clients and in the workshop participants that I am talking to around not wanting to think about it as like administrative housekeeping stuff, but really thinking about what are the things that you need to have in place so that the legacy that you pass to organizations, children, nieces, nephews, what have you, aligns with your desires. So, when it comes to financial planning, if you play around with any of those calculators online, let's say for like, how much money do I need to retire or things like that, most of them use the number 90 and plan for you to enjoy a life through the age of 90. Some things to keep in mind as you approach this stage to make sure you have in place are things like a will and a trust, if appropriate. Making sure that the beneficiaries that are listed on your retirement accounts, on your life insurance policies, things like that, are the right people that you want in those roles. We've all heard of horror stories where a couple was together in their 20s, they separated, 30, 40, 50 years goes by, one of them passes, but they never change the beneficiary on a life insurance policy. And that life insurance policy ends up going to an ex. We want to make sure that the money that we have set up to pass on to somebody else is, in fact, going to the right person. And when it comes to speaking to the social workers in the room, yes, it can go to a child, a spouse, thinking about the legacy you want to lead, but it can also go to a higher education organization. It can also go to your favorite community nonprofit. It can also, you can also donate to public radio, right? There are lots of different ways to leave a legacy. And we're getting ready to undergo one of the largest wealth transfers in this country. So we're going to see some shifts. And other things to know about this stage of life is long-term care. I know so many people that I speak to have a desire to age in place. And what are the accommodations that might need to be made in order to age in place? For example, do you have a bathroom on your first floor? Do you have a ramp instead of stairs, as so many of us are temporarily able-bodied or might not have certain disabilities? Can things accommodate things like walkers, wheelchairs, etc.? What does that look like? And as far as the self-care aspect of it, I mentioned this earlier, but thinking about this more of active legacy planning instead of inheritance. There's been conversation over the past few years of folks, this put your barrier up before I say this phrase, of belonging to a movement called Die With Nothing. And the idea is to pass on financial, emotional, or tangible assets while the person is alive to be able to witness it. So many of us assume that inheritance has to be after somebody has passed, but you're also able to move your monies or assets to other people, organizations while you are alive, are here on this plane of earth. These conversations are a gift. If you are older and thinking about talking to adult children or grandchildren, you might worry that you're going to make them sad or that it's going to be uncomfortable or that somehow, you're going to cause a rift. And much like when we're talking about, again, put your barrier up, something like suicidal ideation and assessment, it's so important to actually say the thing and make sure you have a clear conversation and not just hint at these things and hope that they can read between the lines. Having these types of open and vulnerable conversations is a gift. I can tell you, as a person who has parents who are getting older and in-laws who are getting older, having parents and in-laws who are able to say, hey, here's what we're imagining for our lives for the next few years is so helpful. Even the conversations that, they've had with me around, in case something happens, here's where the binder is stored so that you can be able to get access to things like, the bank accounts that we need so that our bills can be paid, making sure that you have those documents, not just up to date, but also that folks know how to access them as needed. And as far as like the broader considerations in your org and in your workplace, Gabby talked about this in the last section. There's a lot of bureaucracy here. After a person passes away, the reality is that the so-called estate may not be settled for a year or longer. So if, let's say, you're working with a client who is experiencing a lot of debt and they have been told or have assumed that potentially a parent or grandparent is going to pass on some money to them when they pass away, they may not get that money when that event happens. So you're compounding grief on top of, assumptions, on top of financial stress. So making sure you actually understand the reality of these things. The other thing that's kind of icky but is important to know is that for a lot of these things, your clients are going to need the death certificate to show that that person has in fact passed, which can feel really tender and really icky. So being mindful that if you're working with somebody who has a loved one who has passed and they are trying to do things like make sure their life insurance policy is figured out or make sure that their mortgage is being paid before they sell it, that you know that they're going to have to ask for that, and that can feel a little bit uncomfortable. Other things is like honoring your client's dignity and autonomy if and when they are sound of mind, and what a gift it is to think through what that might look like. So holding space for the both and when you are working with clients or if you're in an organization that is in this space. Okay. We're going to do a deep breath and I'm going to pass it to Gabby here. We're going to do a little poll and check in as well.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Lindsay. So just to revisit, which financial milestone are you working toward? Has it changed at all from that first poll? We just want to get a sense of your initial gut feeling, and maybe now, maybe it's shifted, maybe it hasn't. One thing I'll do too, just for the time being while we're waiting for poll responses, I'll just give a quick kind of summary thought here. And that is, if you noticed over the course of our presentation that we were sharing some technical details on each phase. We were sharing some specific recommendations and ways to manage through. But, other than that, it wasn't super in depth on like, how does the market function? How do you do investments? How do you set money aside into which specific vehicles? What's a mutual fund, right? Like we didn't cover those types of topics. And there's a few reasons for that, but mostly it's because it's actually the behaviors that are much more important than those specific items. And certainly like hiring a financial planner, I saw somebody mention a planners that they work with. Both Lindsay and I can do sort of financial planning and investment planning with clients, but the key aspect, and this is one that's both maybe a blessing and a curse for the group of folks that we're talking to here, the key aspect to sort of financial wellness is actually behavioral, right? It's actually being able to sort of manage through whether it's, avoidance behavior or anxiety or worry, et cetera. That's really where we're, seeing the majority of folks who may struggle with financial wellness is really on that sort of behavioral management level, rather than like, oh my gosh, I picked the wrong mutual fund in my 401k, right? Like that's rarely sort of the linchpin of the plan.
Sorry, Gabby, my mouse had a mind of its own. So sorry.
You're great. You're great. You're doing great. No worries. I was just filling some space while people were answering the question. So in terms of B, but mentally C, I hear you, Brad. I hear you. Okay. So in terms of the responses, it looks like even more people feel that they're in accumulation, right? Feel that they're in growing and saving and investment. So that's great. But more or less staying the same overall. So some folks who are kind of in that second or third rung of that pyramid that we talked about, right? That first level being positive cash flow, then second and third levels being how do we really save and invest for the future in the smartest possible way. All right. So thank you so much. And I think we're going to pop over to navigating the water that we're in. And I think that, one of the key points that maybe we as social workers feel a little more acutely possibly than other professions is we feel some moral obligation or energetic obligation to really make the systems that we live in more just, right? Like, and that's wonderful. That's great. That's like why we're doing this work. That's so wonderful. And at the same time, those changes are so slow often and frustrating and backwards and forwards that in the meantime, very likely for everyone on this call, our lifetime is not going to see huge paradigm shifts in the way that our economic and market systems work, right? So as we think about navigating going forward, keeping in mind that we have to survive in the system that we're already in. And along the way, if we can make changes and make it more just and make it more functional, that's great. And at the same time, it's not our primary purpose. Our primary purpose within this system is to survive and to thrive and to make the impact that we can along the way. That's where we are with this situation, right? So another way that you can be an ally to colleagues might be to encourage that type of language, that type of camaraderie, like, hey, we all see where this could be improved. And at the same time, that's not where we are. And so let's do the things we can do to take good care of ourselves, right? So it's a yes and. And then let's just see, where can we learn how to invest? So maybe we're going to get to some of those things and we can ask specific questions, but I'll turn it over to Lindsay for a minute.
Yeah, so we've just to ground y'all, we have about like 10, 12 minutes left of stuff, including some polls, but we're hoping to save about 10 minutes at the end for your questions. So I've already seen in the chat why this matters, but why taking care of yourself matters is so that you can stay in this field if this is a field that matters to you. So you can strengthen your resilience so that you can have a financial safety net if needed, so that you know what life will be like as you retire and how you want to spend your time. Practicing financial self-care and getting some of these things in order strengthens your ability to maintain those boundaries, right? If you decrease that financial stress, you're taking away some of that emotional, physiological, and physical stress, and you may be better able to practice some of the things that I mentioned earlier can erode when you're experiencing financial stress. The other reason, Gabby and I have said this many, many times, is modeling that financial resilience and self-care for other people. Whether it's clients, whether it's colleagues, whether it's a supervisor, whether it's a supervisee. Maybe you were in this morning's supervision training and you're thinking about how to help folks who are coming up in this field. And quite frankly, the importance of understanding the emotional impact of money. So often money is just talked about as a dollars in, dollars out. It's a spreadsheet, it's just math, but there are big emotions tied up in this. And I think as social workers, we are uniquely equipped to understand how these things intersect. So I want to kind of read this excerpt here, why this matters. Integrating financial education with psychological support and targeted outreach is essential to promoting financial stability, narrowing intergenerational wealth disparities, and enhancing mental health access across diverse populations. My point in taking this is from a paper on marketing and communication, friends. If they are seeing that taking care of our financial health has this positive ripple effect in so many other ways, then we as social workers should also be taking this seriously. So as you move deeper into the existing milestone that you're in, or you're moving toward a new milestone, connect with your why. Why does it matter for you to have financial resilience? Why does it matter for you to have an emergency fund, or to make sure you're saving for your future, or to plan for your legacy? Do you want peace of mind, connection, clarity, stability? What is the why? And use that instead of just because somebody told me I should hit this milestone. And that is going to strengthen your ability to achieve that goal. when I talk to my clients, and I'm sure Gabby probably feels similar, about what does it feel like to check something off of the list that we mentioned earlier, to put some money into savings, to have a conversation with a loved one about aging. What are the feelings that come up? I hear an array of feelings, but most of the time I hear things like peace of mind, calm, relaxed, strong, joyful. There's a lot of these types of emotions. Sometimes even just getting to neutral is a gift and is a win. And as far as what happens behaviorally, as Gabby mentioned, what are some of the behaviors that can change when you start really taking an active stance in practicing financial self-care? I mean, they run the gamut, but I'll just share a few that have happened I would say over like the past 6 months that clients and workshop participants have shared with me. Somebody said, I finally have enough money in an emergency fund that would protect me in the event of a job loss. Like, talk about peace of mind there. Talk about relaxation there. Talk about grit and resilience and strength. Somebody else said, I booked that vacation that has been on my radar forever, but I was too scared to be able to take. And actually, after looking at my money, I realized I have enough in my emergency fund. I am contributing toward my retirement. And as Gabby mentioned earlier, I'm not going to just restrict myself and not enjoy my life, and gave themselves permission to trust themselves enough to take that vacation. Conversations with loved ones about everything from, I think I want to take a different job that's a little less stressful, but also pays a little less. Can we do that as a household? What do we need to do to make this work for us? Other things like little upgrades around the house, updating a laptop or a TV or home speakers. Again, these things are all things that I think we brush off, but can, if important to you or important to your clients, can be important. And even just like giving yourself permission for those little indulgences. I had somebody say like, oh, I can get myself a latte once a week and know that like the world's not going to spin off of its axis, right? So pushing back against some of the shame rhetoric that so many of us have consumed implicitly or explicitly around money. So, okay, passing it back to Gabby for another poll, thinking about this stuff.
Awesome. Okay, so hopefully everyone here has heard some tangible actions they can take or items that they can take forward with them. So what is one thing you could take action on within your current financial stage? And again, here it's short answers. So pop it in the poll. What's one thing you can take action on? Also, okay, look into tax savings options. Love that. So tax advantaged accounts are great. To answer I think someone in the chat kind of answered the question earlier about the HSA, but I would echo what was shared. An HSA is a concept that's attached to what type of insurance you have. So if you're not carrying insurance of any kinds, like through the ACA or through your employer, you yes, keep putting money in your SEP. Then you may not be eligible for an HSA, but the best plan is to review your options either with a financial advisor or a tax advisor. Take a vacation. Love that. I love that. That was the takeaway. Amen to that. Okay. Put $3,000 in an account for a crisis. Yes. I really found it helpful what Lindsay was sharing about the emergency fund. I think that's, one thing that can bring a lot of peace of mind, a lot of bang for your buck in terms of relaxation. Save small amounts and increase it as salary increases. Great. Beneficiaries are clear. Yes, that's great. One note on wills. Wills are meant to be read in a probate court. So I think we kind of brushed over like, do we need a will? Do we need a trust? Again, would review that with your financial planner or tax planner. But beneficiaries, if you have assets that can have a named beneficiary, those are really the best option, the most cost effective, the most efficient, the least paperwork. So naming beneficiaries really is a thing that you should focus on. Buy a rug. Okay, I want to see a picture of that rug. That's really exciting. Emergency fund ladder was so helpful. Agree. Totally. Legacy discussions with family. That is something that in my own Client base, I see a lot. In fact, sometimes we just have appointments where we're just saying aloud what the parents have said to me back to the kids, right? Like the only point of the appointment is to just say, here's where, parents or aunt and uncle's monies are, and here is their plan for spending or not spending those. Habit of talking about money, yes. Practice of self-care, reflect on what you can't control, yes. Being kind, yes. And again, back to that whole idea of behavioral management, like shame has no benefit of any kind in any behavioral management. So just keeping that in mind. And then let's see, emergency fund amounts with your own children. Yeah, I love that. Get your household on the right path. Crisis saving. I like that phrase. Haven't heard that before. And forgetting to spend intentionally on your life experience. Yes. Going more into detail with your daughter. That's great. Okay, so I'm with that going to turn it back to Lindsay. She's going to share some more financial self-care concrete tools, but these are great things that you can do.
Yeah, I mean, y'all nailed it, and I so appreciate how quickly from the chat I can see that you were able to quickly lock into what it means to practice financial self-care. So these are just some more ideas, even though most of them were in the chat. I wanted to plug an admin night party. This was popularized, I want to say maybe Wall Street Journal, and then Priya Parker picked it up. But it's literally just having your friends over and everyone doing those tasks that you don't want to do or you've been putting off doing. I have done a couple of them virtually, and sometimes that can be really helpful. The other thing I meant to share around the wills and trusts when it comes to the legalese of that is also check your benefits if you're traditionally employed. I used to work at the University of Michigan, and I was able to get my will and trust created by opting into the legal plan there. So yes, it can seem scary and overwhelming, but there are some benefits that you just might not be thinking about that are definitely worth taking advantage of. So, all right. Somebody asked in the chat if they can get these slides. I will send them to Madison later, but if you want to screen grab this is just like a little cheat sheet of the 4 different milestones and what to be thinking about on a personal level, and then like more broader on that clinical and organizational level. So, Gabby, I was going to pass it back to you. Do you want me just to read these last? We're trying to be so, what's the word, like egalitarian here, but I'm like, okay, I could just, that it's hard to be a social worker sometimes, right? Okay, so today you've learned how beliefs shape money, culture, both the culture of being a social worker or your personal culture. You can define that many ways. Why financial knowledge supports personal and professional well-being. How to practice acts of financial self-care, and the 4 different lifespan financial milestones and respective actions that you take in each of those 4 milestones. So, as promised, we've got about 10 minutes left for questions. Madison, I don't know if people can unmute themselves or not, but if you want us to read off the questions, here are some general resources. Again, your miles may vary, and we'll share our contact info in a bit. But yeah, if anyone has questions that we have not gotten to, happy to take some time to answer them now.
Lindsay and Gabby, I actually pulled some of the questions that were in the chat.
George.
So we will hold off on people being able to unmute. I'm going to ask these, and then if you have more questions, please put them in the chat or in the Q&A. One of the questions is, if you have a push-pull behavior with finances where you spend a lot or none at all, how do you correct that behavior?
Great question. I would invite you to think about what is it that you are trying to get when you are spending. Oftentimes, our brain is getting a hit of oxytocin, serotonin, dopamine, and or endorphins when we spend money. And when we say, oh, I'm just not going to spend on fill in the blank think, or I'm just not going to spend any money at all, we don't necessarily do a good job of replacing that particular need. Think about if you worked with a client, maybe who was pulling back on using substances. We wouldn't just say, okay, just stop using substances today, because there could be a huge hole that you're creating. So think about, are you trying, what type of need are you trying to have met by spending? And how can you meet that need in a different way, and kind of build up that toolkit of things that you can do to tend to that particular need? And sometimes that can quiet the intensity, or at least make the swing from spend no money to spend all my money a little bit less of a wide pendulum swing.
Yeah, I think that's great. I would echo that same thing. And I would, substance use, great analogy. I would also use like eating disorder, right? So again, because in a similar way, like you can't stop eating and you can't stop spending money, because you do have to do it. And so it's one of those hard areas where you have to maintain sort of a moderation approach. And that is actually sometimes can be quite a bit harder than like a black and white. And so would just echo Lindsay, and I would say like clinically, some of the tools you might use like similar to what would be effective in eating disorder would maybe be like DBT skills, and thinking about some of those. I was just thinking maybe some of the homeworks in DBT would be helpful. So if you have a therapist, or if you're seeing somebody, or if you're already a therapist, you might use some of those tools too.
I'm actually going to combine two questions. So somebody asked where people can learn to invest. But another question was, what resources should folks use if they're looking for support with financial planning or advice?
I can go back to that last screen, Gabby, while you share.
Yeah, no, I think so. There's lots of resources out there. What Lindsay and I talked about when we were making this resource slide, though, is that oftentimes, especially specific to investment advice, some of the resources have a particular point of view, or they have maybe some underlying goal in mind. So it is important to be a critical consumer of information in this topic, just as in any topic, but especially when you aren't maybe as familiar with the content area, it's harder to do that. So these are some resources that really shouldn't have much of a bias when it comes to like investment advice and so on. What I would also say is be very aware that anytime there are financial advisors involved, and I say this as a financial advisor, there's always a pay structure there, right? So even if you're not directly paying the advisor for advice, there is always some incentive for that person to do a particular action, right? Whether that's to get you to invest and manage money, or whether that's to get you to buy a certain type of investment product. Now that could be okay. That could, your interests might align, right? Like you might have the same interest as your financial advisor, and they may be a fiduciary, which is even better, but it's not a given, right? It's not a guarantee. So it is something that you should kind of think through about where you're getting your advice. And it's okay. In fact, I encourage my clients to ask me how they get paid. Like, how are you paid to do this job sitting in front of me now? Do you get a salary only? Do you get variable compensation? How are you paid? So when you're looking for investment advice, if you're looking for resources, just always be a critical consumer of that information, so that you're not kind of caught off guard, like, oh, I didn't realize that you were incentivized to give me this advice over that advice, right?
100%. This is really gender neutral, but it's called How to Be a Rich Old Lady by Amanda Holden. And she used to work in investment banking for like a decade, and now specifically teaches women and non-binary folks how to invest. Not associated with or affiliated with, but the book just came out within the last month or two, so might check that out from the library. I find it practical and also very social justice oriented about what Gabby and I have been talking about living in the both and of needing to take care of yourself financially while also understanding that a lot of these systems we struggle we don't agree with.
Yeah. And I'll say in just a super practical sense, right? So there are some basic tenets, right? Like if you're investing for the long run, not looking at your account every day, right? Or like having some sense of like what's your spending and expense ratio. So there are some things that should cut across as you read various pieces of advice or as you consume different pieces of information from various resources. There should be some through lines that you notice, and that you can take forward as consistent pieces of advice, right? Like thinking about how to be that critical consumer of the information.
I'm going to ask one more question and sticking on the theme of resources, but going back to legacy planning. Somebody asked if you have a book, a workbook, or other resources that you can suggest to share with families that would have checklists and prompts for conversations about legacy planning.
Good question.
Yes, I mean, yes. So there are some, I believe it's called Family Conversations. I can send it to Madison to send out after the session. But yes, there are some books and guides. Financial planners and estate planners may have access to those. They don't necessarily have them at the ready because it's not always the request. We don't always get that request. But yes, I have used some books I can send out, and I can maybe put that in the chat right now.
Yeah, I put in Financial Life Planning by George Kinder. There are some like worksheets, not necessarily as worksheety as maybe what Gabby had mentioned. So I'm excited to get my hands and eyes on the book that you'd recommended. Always good.
Okay. I think that is everything. Gabby and Lindsay, thank you so much. This was so informative, very useful, just a great discussion. And thank you to everyone for attending this session of Building Healthy, Strong Communities. We hope to see you at our final session this afternoon titled Applied Theater Interventions for Critical Social Work Praxis, U.S. and India Context. The session will begin in just about a half hour at 3 o'clock Eastern. In the next couple of weeks, those who have met the attendance requirements will receive an email from our continuing education office. Any questions regarding CE should be directed to the CE office at ssw.conted@umich.edu. Thank you and have a wonderful day.